Welcome to the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. I'm Melissa Lieberman, a fellow IC and business coach. On this podcast, I teach you to become a consistently booked independent consultant without becoming a pushy salesperson or working 24/7. If I can do it, you can too. Listen on to find out how. Welcome to this week's episode. I'm thrilled you're here with me. We're going to dive into everything about independent consultants' value propositions today. And there might be some things that surprise you along the way. So stay tuned because while we're diving into this, and it's so important, and we'll talk about how to strengthen your value proposition, I also want to share with you some surprising things about the value proposition. And I'll just tease it, leave it there for you. But stay tuned because in the middle, we're going to talk about some things that might surprise you about these value propositions. So with that, let's talk about really the value proposition and why this came up. I work with clients on this topic a lot. It starts usually from one of two places, either wanting to have a stronger value proposition for something they're writing, like a website or updating a LinkedIn profile, or creating some form of a capabilities document. And so we start diving into their consulting value proposition that way. Or oftentimes it might also come up, and that you may be in the same boat where you want to be able to more crisply, succinctly, impactfully describe what you do when you're in conversations with people. And so usually those are the two types of situations that come up. And I start working with clients on these topics. And then I realize one of two trends usually is happening. Usually what's happening is independent consultants, perhaps like you, are either avoiding the value proposition because it feels hard, it feels complicated, it feels impossible to get right, or you are diving in to try to work on your value proposition, but you're overcomplicating it and never seem to arrive at a solution or a destination because you've just constantly trying to perfect it. And so today I want to walk you through whole things about how to strengthen your consulting value proposition at any stage you are in your consulting business so that you can increase the effectiveness of the conversations you're having and increase the effectiveness of your online presence, of the way you're positioning yourself, of the way you're standing out in the marketplace, and ultimately lead to a situation where you're being sought after for what you do. So with that, that's what our topic for today. So excited to dive into this with you. Before we dive in, I want to offer to you, or recommend to you rather, to go take a scorecard that is complementary to the work that we're doing today. Very complementary to the work we're doing today. It's called the Independent Consultants Offer Scorecard. And we'll put the link in the show notes. You can also find it at IC, the two letters, ictoolkit.com. And when you go and answer the questions in that Consultants Offer Scorecard, it's going to help point out the areas where you might be weaker, in the areas of opportunity for you to improve what your service offering is, including around the value proposition itself. So with that, let's talk about the agenda for today. The agenda for today, while we're talking about strengthening your independent consulting business proposition, I'm going to walk through just some basics. Make sure we're all on the same page here about what is an independent consulting value proposition. Why do you want one? What do you do with it? I'm going to give you some very specific examples. And then we're going to talk about the blockers. What very specific blockers that are preventing you from creating the most impactful value proposition that you can, that ultimately leads to you building your reputation and your personal brand and and becoming sought after for what it is that you do. And then we're going to wrap up with the 11 strategies that will help you to improve your value proposition. So that's what we're focused on here today. Let's start with the basics. What is an independent consultant's value proposition? We oftentimes get this kind of different marketing concepts mixed together. And so I just wanted to level set when I'm talking about an independent consultant's value proposition, what I mean. Simply put, a value proposition is the words that you're using to communicate three things: how you help your ideal consulting clients solve a problem they care about solving, or how you help them achieve a goal they care about achieving, and through the lens of your unique approach. So it's all about who is your ideal client, what is the problem they want to solve that you help them solve, or what is the goal they want to achieve, and what is unique about you and your approach. We're going to talk in a minute about what we use these for, and I think that will really help cement that. But before we do, I want to talk with you a little bit. This is very important. A lot of times we listen to podcasts or go to webinars and we try to apply the concepts that are being shared to our business, but those concepts are being shared for a different point in your business trajectory, or those concepts are being shared from more of a business to consumer lens and you have a business to business type of a business model. So I want to really be clear as I'm going through this value proposition conversation with you today. Think about where you are in your business. If you're a newer independent consultant, why should you have a value proposition? If you're a newer independent consultant, you will want to have 2 or 3 value propositions in your back pocket to use as go-to explanations when you're talking to people about what you're doing. When you talk to people about, the transition that you're making in your professional life. When you're talking about with your network and having conversations with either potential clients, with people you don't know, maybe they would be a client or maybe they wouldn't, or maybe they would refer you to someone. You're not sure where the conversation is going to go, if anywhere. When you're talking about 2 potential collaborators or people who offer adjacent services. So if you're newer as an independent consultant, you want to be thinking about what could the 2 or 3 value propositions be for me to have in my back pocket that make it really easy to explain what I do in the context of a conversation with these individuals. You want to be able to use those as a basis for tailoring an explanation of what you do to the conversation with that person. You may want to use these value propositions as a basis for your online presence. And we'll talk a little bit more in a moment about how to apply these value propositions. But these, when you're a newer independent consultant who might not have a very narrowed down set of offerings, in fact, you might actually be someone who's been an independent consultant for 10 or 20 years and you still don't yet have a really narrow set of offerings that you want to be known for and sought after for. Having these 2 or 3 value propositions that you can pick and choose from as a starting point that describe what you do in a way that's relevant to the conversation is really valuable. If you're more established, meaning you have a more clear, definitive set of clients that are ideal that you want to be working with, you have a more definitive set of solutions that you offer, the set of problems that you solve, and you're at the place where you want to build a reputation and become sought after for what you do, then having a clear value proposition is the basis for that and ultimately will drive inbound leads and referrals for you. So depending on where you're at in your business and what your goals are, those are the reasons why you want to have a value proposition. Keep in mind, though, that the value proposition is more of a conversation starter, or a conversation advancer is a better way to say it. You're using this value proposition as a way to advance the conversation, not as a way to quote unquote pitch someone. Whether you're talking with them in real life or whether you're creating copy for your website or your LinkedIn profile or whatever you're doing online. The intent of the value proposition is to inform your marketing, is to inform your conversations, is to help give you kind of guardrails about how you're describing what you do versus it being something that you lean really heavily on to somehow spark some magic and create, someone to say, well, I need that. Let's create a contract, right? It's not doing this selling for you. And I think knowing that is so important because a lot of times we put such an emphasis on this value proposition, thinking it's going to do so much more than it really is intended to do. So with that, that is what a value proposition is and why to have one. Simply put, even if you're new or not new, having that go-to way of describing yourself in conversations and online and your, business positioning and presence is what the value proposition is used for, is the fuel for. So let's talk a little bit about what the types of value propositions are. So I think we kind of merge everything together. Some of us think that a value proposition is sort of a tagline. Others think it's, kind of a paragraph, like a mission statement and everything in between. And so really breaking this down and thinking about it from the lens of how am I going to use this value proposition? When you think about it from that perspective, there's really three main types of value propositions. The first is conversational, a conversational version of your value proposition. It's the answer to what do you do? And the goal of that type of value proposition is to further the conversation, to pique their interest into talking more, to advance the conversation, to make it clear ultimately kind of what you do and who they might refer to you, or maybe they raise their hand and say, oh, that sounds just, like a challenge I'm having, in this organization that I'm running. Having that kind of conversational version is really valuable from that perspective. It kind of reminds me, I may have shared this story on the podcast before, but when I was early in my career working at Accenture, my then boyfriend, who's now my husband, probably boyfriend, maybe fiance, it doesn't matter. Anyway, he was constantly trying to figure out what I do. Like as consultants, it's kind of a mystery sometimes. What do we do as a consultant? Likely it's a mystery for your family. It may even be a mystery for you. In a way, at a high level what you do, but it's really challenging to articulate it. Well, when I would try to help him to understand what it is that I did, the only thing he really latched onto at the time I was implementing PeopleSoft. So we were doing PeopleSoft upgrades and PeopleSoft implementations. And we would have to move the data from their old legacy system into PeopleSoft. And I was on the functional side, so I would help with a lot of the business rules and requirements and things like that. Anyway, somehow he latched on to that I migrate environments, which isn't actually true because I wasn't actually the person doing the technical work, but that's all he could figure out. She migrates environments, which, yes, that was something I helped to create the outcome for. But that literally had nothing to do with what it is that I was doing. But it's something, for whatever reason, he latched onto and would try to explain to other people we were talking to, what I did from that perspective. It was so weird. Anyway, my point is here, you getting really clear on what you do in very much layman's terms, so you can transfer that to other people, whether it be your family who might be talking to, people who somehow connect you to an ideal client, happens all the time. Or it might be that you are just really focused on getting clear for yourself. So when you're describing it to someone you're meeting with for the first time or someone you're catching up with, that they can really understand what it is we're talking about. Oftentimes, rather than taking the layman's terms, the simple, what I like to call third grader terms, we try to make it sound really sophisticated and we use these big words, and then no one understands what we're talking about. So, as you're thinking about that conversational version of your independent consulting value proposition, think about it from that lens. How do I describe this in such a simple way that advances the conversation, that makes it relatable to that person because you've been already asking that person so many questions and understanding what they do. And then you can relate what you do using the value propositions that you've created for yourself and can pull out of your back pocket. The next type of value proposition, so we've got conversational. The next kind is more of a headline version. This is a phrase, not a sentence. We're just creating a simple phrase, and I'll give you some examples here in a moment. Simple phrase that describes what you do, how you help your ideal clients. I'll talk more about this in a moment, but it's not about you and your expertise and your experience. It's about what ideal client challenges you help to solve. And the purpose of this kind of a value proposition is to stand out in searches, to be clear when people are looking you up online, whether they're finding you through some keywords or potentially just looking at on your website or your LinkedIn profile, for example, and it's so clear what you do. And then finally, the third type of value proposition is the long version, the longer paragraph that describes the benefits and outcomes you create, describes the pain you help your clients avoid or get out of, describes how you're different, describes the goals that you help your clients achieve. And it's a reflection of your personal brand. And that longer paragraph or set of bullet points, however you want to craft it, serves as the foundation. What is the word? Like the marketing guide guidelines, the marketing guidelines or the brand guidelines. That's what I was trying to think of. The brand guidelines for all of the work that you do when you're creating presentations, like speaking presentations, or when you're writing copy for your website or updating your LinkedIn profile or sending an email or creating a new offering or service offering. That longer version can really help you to stay in your lane and be very clear about what types of problems you solve and for whom and why they care about those problems and why you're unique. So, as we wrap up here with the very basics, I want to share a couple things. The 5 elements of a solid value proposition, an effective value proposition, and then I'll give you a few examples, and then we'll dive into the heart of this process, which is really talking about the blockers that you're likely experiencing with your value proposition and the strategies to overcome those. So, the elements that I've over and over again found to make an effective value proposition, there are 5 of them. Number 1, it's clear. Back to what I was describing earlier, make it clear to a layman. Make it clear. I like to just say, would my 3rd grader, who's 9, would he understand what I'm talking about? Might take a little bit of extra explanation, but just making it as clear as possible so someone doesn't take away a entirely different take on what it is that you do than what you intended, like this migrating of environments example I shared with you. I did a terrible job of explaining what my value proposition was, what I was doing as a consultant. And so as a result, that's all that he took away. So you want to be really clear and using very simple words. You want to be specific. I'll give you some examples of this in a minute. You want to be results oriented. You want it to be about the ideal client and not about you. A lot of us think that I need to be proving my expertise. I need to be proving my experience. I need to be proving that I'm qualified to do this. No one cares. Let me be clear. Some people do care. Some people do care. Most consulting buyers don't care what your background is, what your education is, even. What they care about is understanding from you that you understand and can lead them through a process to really clearly understand their challenges, their goals, and they believe in and can resonate with the plan that you're proposing to them to solve those and to achieve the goals. So, thinking about it from that lens, you want to make this about your ideal client, not about proving your qualifications. And you want to make it unique to explain what your differentiators are. And I'll give you some examples of what that looks like in a minute. Let me give you a couple of examples here. So, let's say you're an organizational change consultant. Your value proposition may be something like, I'm an organizational change consultant who works with healthcare companies to navigate merger and acquisition so they're not one of the 83% that fail. That sounds, I would be very curious to know more about that. That piques interest. It has keywords. It's very specific. Another example of that might be more conversational. I help healthcare companies with post M&A org change so they don't become one of the 83% that fail. That is a conversation advancer, right? Another example, and we're going to dive into the blockers. Another example, I'm a corporate leadership consultant who works with mid-sized companies to increase their speed to market. I'm a corporate leadership consultant who works with mid-sized software companies to increase their speed to market. We don't need to go into embellishing how we do this. We don't need to go into embellishing that, we're doing a combination of facilitation and executive team offsites and leadership coaching in groups and individually. We don't have to go into all of that detail. We can talk about one of the ultimate results that those companies care about is speed to market. Another example in the same category, you might put on your LinkedIn profile something to the effect of, I'm a corporate leadership consultant who works with mid-sized software companies in the US to increase their speed to market using my proprietary SLT framework. I don't know what SLT is. I made it up. But you see what I'm saying? Like something that really looks interesting and unique and differentiated. Or if you're in a conversation, it might be something like, I'm a leadership consultant who works with mid-sized companies to improve their speed to market. So very similar to the first example, but a little bit more conversational. It's just a starting point, right? We're not going to give them the entire paragraph of what it is that we do. Our goal is to create a conversation advancer. So, with that, let's talk about some examples about those blockers, those most common value proposition, either blockers or diluters, whatever word you want to use. Why isn't your value proposition as strong as it could be? The number one reason I find is that it's too broad. I was talking to someone the other day and they were describing to me what they do and what their goals are for their business. And as I was digging into what their challenges were, what they said to me was, I've got this framework that can be used by any type of company to create alignment. I'm not going to give you all the details because it's specific to her, but the gist of it was, I've created this framework that can be used by any type of company to do anything related to alignment. She thought that was great from the perspective of, look how versatile it is. I can pretty much do anything for anyone. That's the opposite of what you want to be doing. And I shared that with her too. That's the opposite of what you want to be doing. It's so broad, no one relates to that. No one is able to see in in the seconds or even milliseconds of time and attention you might get from someone, either online or in person. That's not going to be compelling to anyone because it's for everyone, right? This is a very common marketing concept that I'm sharing with you right now. If it's too broad, which most of us as independent consultants create something that is too broad. We create something that's too broad because we don't want to cut off opportunity with other potential clients that want something slightly different. We don't want to turn away potential clients. It comes from scarcity. I don't want to turn away potential work that I could do because I'm worried I'm not going to find enough of the ideal clients or ideal engagements that I do want to do. So I better cast a wide net. That's the root cause of where this too broad comes from. And you want to be able to recognize that in yourself as you're creating and strengthening your value proposition, that it's okay to be very specific. And in fact, it's much more impactful to be more specific and ultimately puts you on that road to become known for and sought after for what you do. Another example is creating a value proposition that's so jargony that no one even knows what it means. I'll tell you, I was doing some research and separate project that I'm working on, like trying to figure out how Chat GPT could work really well for us as independent consultants and what kinds of use cases it's really powerful for. So anyway, I put in some value propositions into Chat GPT as part of some testing, and I thought that'll be great for this episode. So I put into Chat GPT some different types of consultants, and one of the questions I asked it was, give me a value proposition for a fractional product manager. I was just like really curious what would happen. Here's what it told me. I work closely. Think about this. If you're a fractional product manager, I work closely with cross-functional teams to drive product development from ideation to launch, ensuring ongoing success and growth. What? It's so jargony, so high level. Anyone could do this. Anyone with a form of product management background, right? Internal employees could do it. It's just so broad. I could probably go buy a book. I mean, I have a product management background, so this might not be fair, but you could buy some books and watch some YouTube videos and potentially know enough to be dangerous in the way it's described here. I work closely with cross-functional teams to drive product development from ideation to launch, ensuring ongoing success and growth. This is an example of so jargony, just using these words, ideation to launch and success and growth. It's a waste of words. Make it more specific. Make it more specific and clear about what is the true problem that someone wants to solve, that your ideal client wants to solve, like speed to market or client adoption of the client software if you're a fractional product manager. The too jargony situation comes from worry about putting a stake in the ground about the results that your clients want. Is this enough? I should add in everything they want. And then worry that maybe you can't fully help them accomplish it. So everything just gets watered down by a bunch of jargon. Think about what is the number one thing or one or two things they care about, and wrap your value proposition around that. We're not writing an essay of all the things you could possibly solve in this world. There's too many. Couldn't even write a book about that. I'm sure you have so much experience, but you've got to simplify it. You've got to take the jargon out and make it impactful so someone can understand what it is that you do and how you help people. It doesn't have to be the one shot that you've got. And so to try to include everything, it ends up just watering it down. Okay. And then the last of the most common blockers for a really strong, impactful value proposition, I just touched on this, is thinking that this value proposition is make or break. I alluded to this. I did a little teaser at the beginning. I said, you might be surprised. We're here talking about value propositions. And what I will tell you is, while they're really important, and we've been talking about why they're important and how to use them for the last 30 minutes, they are not a make or break situation for your business. And it might seem kind of contradictory because we've been spending time on this, but I think it's so important to know that this is not a make or break situation. I personally have made hundreds of thousands of dollars before I ever had any sort of value proposition. And I know dozens and dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of other independent consultants who have also made hundreds of thousands of dollars without any sort of value proposition, that formal value proposition. So take today's episode with a grain of salt. And I think this is really important to think about it from this perspective, because there are so many benefits of having a value proposition. But take the pressure off of yourself, take the pressure off of this process, and lighten it up, because your results are going to be so much more impactful, so much stronger if you take a stab at your value proposition, you test it out, you use it as a foundational guideline, but not as some kind of a hammer to try to create leads and pitch things, pitch your services in a really impactful way that somehow with one or two sentences has your ideal client wanting to sign a contract. It's okay. Just stay in this mode of, this is an evolving thing that I'm constantly learning about, and it's always going to evolve over time. Just simply from the fact of the type of work that you are going to be doing likely will evolve over time. The types of clients that you want to work with will be refined and evolve over time. So of course, your value proposition is going to evolve over time. So please do not use this episode against yourself and think that you better buckle down and make the most amazing value proposition you've ever had in order to succeed in your business, because that's just not the case. Okay, now that we've kind of gone into all this detail about what the value propositions are for your independent consulting business, I'm sure I violated some marketing, textbooks in the way I've described this to you. But for an independent consulting business, thinking about it from that lens, what I've described to you today is the most impactful way to think about a value proposition. Okay, so I'm going to share with you the strategies for overcoming those blockers and improving your value proposition, again, without putting any, requirement to get an A+ or anything like that. We're just doing it to keep advancing your business and making the conversations advance more easily, making you easier to find. Let's start with the strategies for overcoming the blockers and improving your value proposition from more of a conversational type of a value proposition. And then next we'll talk about from more of those written type of value propositions. So conversationally, The 5 strategies that can help you address those blockers that we were just talking about. Number 1, you want to remember the point of the value proposition. Again, I cannot continue to emphasize this enough. This is not going to sell anything. This is not going to help you pitch anything. This is not going to be the magic bullet for you. None of those things. What it is going to do is make the conversations that you're having with people more meaningful. It's going to help advance the conversation. It's going to help them relate to what it is that you're talking about if you do it in a way that I shared earlier, which is creating 2 or 3 value propositions to have in your back pocket. And as you're talking with someone and asking them what they do and what their challenges are and what they're working on right now, you can leverage those value propositions that you've created in your back pocket and pivot them or adjust them so that they relate to what the person is talking about. Something like, oh, you know how you described XYZ? This is what I do. Related to, I'm so fascinated by what you're telling me. This is what I do. And giving them that little short phrase that's, way less than a minute. This is not a speech. This is not a speech. The value proposition is not a speech. It's a simple way to explain what it is that you do in a way that helps to advance the conversation. So you're wanting to connect that value proposition to what you've heard from them. And you can use stories or examples to bring it to life. Stories and examples that are relevant to what it is that they're telling you. The next strategy, so again, I said there would be 5. We're on number 2 for conversational type value propositions. Don't be weird trying to get it right. Honestly, the words don't matter as much as the delivery. So while I was just giving you a lot of examples and advice on how to improve the words of your value proposition, not make them too jargony, at the same time, whatever it is that you have and that you're continuing to refine, you want to deliver it with confidence and as much conciseness as possible and even lightness. Make it light, make it fun, make it interesting how it compares back to what they told you versus feeling like I better say this the way I practiced it last night in the mirror. The next strategy to overcome your blockers from a conversational value proposition perspective is don't undercut yourself. Don't try to be overly humble. Own your expertise. I'm not saying you should exaggerate, but I can tell you after working with so many independent consultants and truly being one myself, almost all of us err on the side of downplaying what we know, downplaying what we're able to contribute. We're not anywhere close to the risk of overstating or exaggerating. So don't undercut yourself. Own your expertise. The other thing you're going to want to do is evaluate and iterate after each use of your value proposition. Spend a little bit of time. What did I learn? What did I learn? I had a client text me earlier and said, I just learned something so amazing from a client who told me why she values the work that I do so much. That's a differentiator for her. She's adding it into the value proposition as a way to emphasize what makes what she does different. And finally, the 5th strategy to overcome the blockers on your conversational value propositions is to use storytelling and examples to bring those to life. Marry them back again to what you're hearing from that other person is saying, so you know that it's relatable to them. Okay, let's talk then as we wrap up here. Stay to the end though, because I have something really fun to share with you about another resource related to this episode. So we're going to wrap up here with the 6 strategies to overcome those blockers for written value propositions. So the first strategy is get yourself into a headspace where they're, from an abundance perspective, we talked about scarcity earlier, get yourself into that headspace that there are clients out there who want your expertise and your help. When you're writing out your value proposition, wherever it goes, on your LinkedIn, on your website, and your proposal, in your capabilities briefings, wherever it is, get yourself into the headspace that there are clients out there who want your expertise and help. Most of us start off in this kind of endeavor, writing a value proposition with thoughts about ourselves and other people, like, there's probably better people at this than I am, or clients aren't going to really want this. They probably will do it internally. Or I wonder if I know what I'm doing. All of these kinds of things, when you're approaching your value proposition and you're not owning your expertise, you end up watering down and diluting that value proposition. So make sure that you're getting yourself into that opposite headspace where you believe truly that there are clients out there, ideal clients, who want your expertise and help. Another impactful way for you to write out your value proposition, whether it's that headline or the long version, is to talk to one person. Think about your ideal client. Don't try to speak to a massive audience when you're thinking about it as you're writing it. Think about that one ideal client who's got the exact problem that you love solving and write it from that vantage point. The next one is asking, so what? So once you've got it written out, ask yourself, so what? Why does it matter? Sometimes you want to do this even up to 5 times. Why does it matter? Why do they care? Why does the client care? If you're an HR consultant, why does the client care about retention? A lot of times, what we do, we find intrinsic value in it, or it's the right way to do something. That's making assumptions that is going to keep your value proposition at a surface level. When you take a step back and think about, why does it matter to retain talent? They don't want to lose intellectual property. They don't want to have the cost of rehiring. They don't want to have the churn and the disruption. Whatever the reasons are for your ideal clients, thinking about so what and answering that question and using those answers to refine your value proposition is going to take it from that surface jargony level down to an impactful, tangible level. The next one is uncovering and emphasizing your uniqueness. Don't tamper it down by thinking, I want to approach my consulting this way, but it might not be right. Maybe I'm doing it the wrong way. A lot of times we do that and we end up putting ourselves into the box with everyone else. When you notice something unique about the way you're approaching your consulting, that's a differentiator. That's not something to question and wonder if you're doing it wrong and someone's going to figure out that you're an imposter. Uncover and emphasize your uniqueness, like purposefully pulling out that uniqueness. You can do that with interviews with past clients or colleagues, as an example. Like I was sharing with you earlier about that client who found something so unique that she would have never found had she not had that conversation with a past client. And then also, don't overlook the value of what comes naturally to you. The next strategy for overcoming your blockers for your value proposition is to test and experiment. You're never done with this value proposition, like I was saying earlier. Have fun with it. Just tweak it as you learn more. Continue iterating and spending a little bit of time here and there, updating your value proposition and using that as your guidance for, content and conversations that you're having, and continuously evolve it, knowing that it's a living, breathing thing. It's not a check the box, I'm done forever sort of a thing. But on the cautionary note, do not stay in the lab too long. If you're staying in the lab, which so many of us do, trying to perfect this value proposition and get an A plus, then you've gone to the other side, which is keeping you stuck, which is not allowing you to advance conversations more quickly, which is not allowing you to become that sought after person because you're trying to make something perfect versus just make MVP it, make a minimum viable product and go out there and start using it and adjust from there. And then finally, the strategy for overcoming the blockers for written value propositions is not to forget about your personality as a differentiator. It's not just what you do and how you do it and how it's unique, but it's also you as a differentiator. A lot of times I work with consultants and they're comparing themselves to, the big four and wondering, why would anyone ever hire me when they could hire McKinsey to do this work or whatever it is? And putting money aside, right? Usually the answer is, well, I'm cheaper. But that's not the answer. Oftentimes the answer is, you know what? You're so much more approachable. You're so much more collaborative than having the ivory tower come in and tell, from a client's perspective, having the ivory tower come in and tell them what to do. Now, I'm not criticizing McKinsey. I think there's some amazing people there, some of whom are former colleagues, but that's one way that clients look at it. And so your personality can be a differentiator. Another way to look at it, I was talking to a client earlier today, and she was telling me how she was, working with the CEO, and they had brought in a consulting firm to do some work. And she was really alongside the CEO, kind of advising him relative to this other consulting firm. And she shared with me that after the call, he kind of turned to her and said, you know what? They have overcomplicated this. Which is, by the way, I mean, having worked at Accenture, I know for sure that's a thing. We tend to overcomplicate things. We've built up these methodologies over the past, 20 or 30 years. Of course, things could potentially be overcomplicated, likely overcomplicated. So think about your personality as a differentiator in the value proposition. You might be someone who's really direct and straightforward and can cut through and get the client results so much faster versus overcomplicating it, meaning it takes so much longer and the road is so much windier and there's so much more risk introduced as a result and so much more resources consumed as a result. So think about your personality as a differentiator also. So with that being said, this is the key to you up-leveling and strengthening your value proposition, whether it's in a conversation mode or a written mode, and using it as a living, breathing thing that you're constantly playing around with, working to improve, but knowing at the same time that the success of your business does not rest on you doing anything else beyond listening to this episode. You might not ever put anything into place, and your success doesn't rest on that. If you are someone who wants to put into action and evolve your business so that you are sought after and you are incrementally improving your business, then hopefully the methods that I shared with you today are really valuable. And I wanted to offer to you some additional questions that you can be asking yourself related to your value proposition and continuing to evolve it so it's not so jargony, so it's so much more clear, and so that it's ultimately impactful in advancing conversations and attracting ideal clients. And so the gift I have for you, the little gift for today is go to the show notes. We'll put the link in the episode, go to the show notes, and I give you 11 questions that you can use as a starting point to really clarify your value proposition and start creating that dynamic for yourself where you have built a reputation for what you do and are sought after as a result of it. Don't forget, go take that IC offer assessment, the Independent Consultants Offer Assessment. You can find it on the page ictoolkit.com. I think it's the first box on the left. And then at the end, after you take that offer assessment, it'll offer to you to get a free 20-minute scorecard review. So book one of those if you haven't already. I would love to meet you, hear about what's going on with your offers and your value proposition and your business in general, and help you in any way that I can. All right. This is a little bit longer episode today, but hopefully gives you some really tangible next steps for you to continue evolving your value proposition and ultimately your business. All right. I will see you again next week. Take care. Thanks for joining me this week on the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. If you liked today's episode, I have 3 quick next steps for you. First, click subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Next, leave me a review in your podcast app so other independent consultants can find and benefit too. And finally, to put the ideas from today's episode into action, head over to melissalieberman.com for the show notes and more resources to help you grow your consulting practice from your first few projects into a full-fledged business. See you next week.